Joining us on this episode is Benj Haisch. Benj is quite possibly the poster child of the Pacific Northwest wedding style. Having had a hand in modernizing the planned in advance intimate elopements that are widespread in our industry, he often goes unnoticed when it comes to acclaim, stating himself he doesn't take the kinds of photos that win awards. Despite that, Benj has amassed hundreds of thousands of followers online, becoming known as a Leica wedding photographer, shooting most of his work in manual focus and/or on film, balancing his family life, his wife's success, and remaining in touch to the region he's always called home. I'm Kyle Wilson, and this is The Photographer's Problem.
So yeah, we've known each other for a while, but our interactions were like a couple of few in persons and a second shot for you and some workshops and things. But yeah, you're always like such a main player in the wedding photographer scene. I feel like we were chatting about it here at work, that you're just always kind of not even trend setting, but just staying so consistent, which has always been really amazing about you. But now you're working on some other projects like the bike and balancing things with your family. And yeah, what are you working on kind of lately right now?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, so as of while we're recording this, I just stopped, or no, I didn't stop, but like shot my last wedding of the season. So a lot of that's just kind of like picking up the pieces of finalizing, sending out galleries and editing and all that kind of stuff. And then also I started a YouTube channel a couple of years ago. So I've been doing a lot more like, camera reviews and all that kind of nerdy stuff that I really enjoy just because I like the intricacies of all those different things and whatnot. And then, you mentioned cycling, because a bunch of people have been like commenting like, you've just been cycling a lot. That's weird. And
Benj is a biker now.
I picked up I picked up cycling earlier this year, and it's been really good both for like my like mental and physical health to have something like that, mainly because like I used to, I live in the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of people think of me as guy that does adventure elopements and hikes a lot and stuff like that. And as someone that has two kids that are in like daycare and school, and I can't just like drive up to the mountains for a full day as much anymore because I have to like go pick up my kids from school. And so, cycling has been a great way. And I live in a great city where within like 5 or 6 miles, I can get to like a really cool like outdoor space where I can see the Puget Sound, and I'm riding through a forest and all this kind of stuff. So it's been a really good way for me, to do a similar thing that I had been doing with all that kind of stuff and connecting with the outdoors when it's not pouring down rain, which it's actually really nice out today. But we're entering our very, very dark and stormy and rainy season here in the Northwest. So that'll definitely change.
Prior to the kids, were you just going out and hiking? Like obviously you were location scouting for certain shoots and things, but were you just a casual, I'm going to go out by myself on this random Wednesday and go hike in the space to look for things? Was that in your flow of things that you used to do?
Kind of. I think it's just like always kind of morphed and transformed, which like sort of even makes sense for me doing the cycling thing recently too. Because I grew up like camping, and my parents live on a lake. So we used to, wakeboarded all that time. And when I was a kid, we'd go snowboarding multiple times a week. And so a lot of those places that I grew up going to, once I became an adult and had more freedom and whatnot to do other things and all that kind of stuff, I would go to ththose same places, like in Snoqualmie Pass where I used to snowboard. I would just go to a hike right across the street and visit those kind of same places and see all those things that I used to think as a kid were super boring. Like whenever my parents took us hiking, we were just like, this is the dumbest thing. Get to the top and be like, so we're looking at something that I could like see a photo of. Who cares, And when you're a kid, you think that stuff's really lame. But growing up and then seeing like, oh, the reason that the viewpoint at the end of it is worthwhile is because of the journey that it took you to get there, right? And so, I think like for a while, like before I had kids and stuff like that, a buddy of mine and I would go hiking once a week, and we just like find different places. And then once I started doing more elopements and things like that, then it became a good excuse to like location scout as a more businessy reason to go hiking and whatnot. And then also that was like 10 years ago now, when posting cool landscape things on Instagram was easy to do on my phone and whatnot as well. So
it actually all benefited you somewhat on social media.
yeah, totally. And so it made sense to obviously I think that's why I succeeded in at least the Instagram world early on too, is because I could just naturally adapt what I was already doing to that platform, because it just happened to be that kind of stuff became popular as well. And so, yeah, I guess I've always just like, and one of the things you mentioned too, which were like slightly off topic, is just like, I think you said something about consistency. And I think that's always been one of my goals in just running my business and looking at my work, is anytime I want to go in a certain direction or whatever with editing or style or anything, I try to go like, okay, what would be the coolest way to do that? And then let's find the difference between where I'm currently at and what that thing might be, and then try to find like a middle ground so that I'm never swaying too far from one direction or the other. Same thing with like pricing and like all these other things that I think have allowed me to run a more sustainable business and brand and things over the 16 years or whatever I've been doing this now.
Yeah, I think sustainability is right on the money for that too, because as long as I've known you, and even before I've known you or just known of you,
sure,
I always got this impression that you were really creating work in environments that you already really enjoyed in your life in general. Like I grew up in the Midwest going camping as a Boy Scout, and then I would hear stories about what you were doing, and I was like, that was what like Boy Scouts in the Midwest were trying to mimic. And so you just had this actual true like West Coast outdoor living experience growing up, and your work never really screams, I'm going to try to be trendy and make this oversaturatedness or make something that seems really otherworldly. You're just really capturing what's kind of already in front of you. And now, of course, the benefit of putting people in it and getting paid for it. It's always felt in that sweet spot where it's never, you said a quote a long time ago, and maybe you still use it, that you don't take award-winning photos. And I always thought that was really interesting, because it's like your work has been so sustainable and so similar in its craft for so long as I've known you. But in my opinion, that should be the award in itself, is that it does look so consistent, and you're able to have a family and a home and all these other things along with that, versus just kind of jumping on whatever the current trend may be. And photographers like you or Jordan, or even somebody like Gabe, who kind of land in their envelope and stay there for so long, is the mark that I've always sought after. I think as a wedding photographer, consistency should be like top of the priority list. And I just think you've accomplished that so well, just both from being your friend as well as watching you as a fan for really long time.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. Yeah. I think that's kind of the thing, is like, I think that a lot of it you can, jump on trends and do one thing, but I try to think of both the way that I photograph things and the way I run my business and everything, is like, how is this going to work 5, 10, 15 years down the road? And if I'm moving towards a trend in something like editing, especially, that's one of the things that I've always tried to be sort of like anchored down to more. I'm not trying to emulate film necessarily, but trying to keep more natural-ish colors and things like that. I don't want to like stray too far to one direction where, someone's going to look at my work in 5, 10 years and be like, oh, just by that look, I can tell when that photo was taken.
Yeah. I think if I look at any
outside
of your work, it doesn't feel like I can go, oh, this was super 2014 or some very specific style that was going on then. But with all that being said, and all the, obviously a huge career that you've had going on, what's been the proudest moment of your career thus far through everything?
Yeah. I think it's hard. I remember, so one of the things that always sticks with me is I think I did a podcast right after my son was born, and they were asking me like, what's your like 5-10 year goals? And at that point, I think, I had my first son, who is 7 now. I just said, like, because obviously I was in this like new dad phase and whatnot. And I just said, if I can coach my kid's baseball team in 5 years, like, I think that will be my goal. And last year, like, I coached his baseball team, and it was because I had like set up enough of my business and whatnot that I was, successful enough and done all these things to allow the time to, be able to take the time to maybe not book as many weddings during that season, or maybe turn down shoots that would be at the same time as his practices and things like that. And so I think that, like, especially having had that goal that I randomly said on a whim on this podcast a long time ago, and then to actually kind of like have it come to fruition at that point was definitely like a time where I was like, okay, cool. But I think like every time like it sounds stupid, but like every time I like pay my taxes or any time that like I make a car payment or we pay our mortgage or whatever, I just think, man, this is so cool that like I get to do someone's hobby for a living. And just as like a thing that has continued on for since I was in college, I've been doing photography as for a job. It's kind of just wild to me that it still kind of exists in that way, you know?
Yeah, I think that's a great sustainable answer. I think like years ago I said something, it's not as similar as coaching a kid's baseball game,
Sure,
but
yeah.
that I want like a Toyota Corolla life. Like I'm not trying to have a BMW and a five bedroom house or anything. I'm trying to have like a regular house and a Corolla. I drive a CRV. I think I landed it.
There you go.
That I can pay and have a normal regular life. I think photography doesn't allow you a career to be a multimillionaire or a billionaire or something like that. It's just not the gig for that, but it can have a very successful and satisfying normal regular life,
Totally.
which I think is a great sustainable goal within it.
Absolutely.
As you've gotten through those points to get to where you're at now, what's been one of the business decisions that you made that wasn't so great? What was like kind of the worst thing you've done?
Well, I mean, the worst thing I've ever done in my business was early on. No one really told me how taxes worked. And so I just wasn't ready to like do my taxes. And so someone was like, oh, you can just like file an extension. And then I didn't really know how that worked. And so I didn't pay them for a couple of years and just kind of saved and thought like, oh, I can just do it. And then I didn't realize there was going to be giant penalties and the IRS would be like, you're an idiot. Which also happened about the time that I actually started doing it more like full time and started being sort of successful. So that was really great. But I feel like
that's a quick learning experience, though.
Oh yeah, real great.
Now.
I know now. I keep really good books now and make sure I do everything on time, obviously. But yeah, it's just one of those like dumb young things that I don't know. Like you just like I did really well in other things when I got good advice, and then other things I just didn't do so well. But I think like I still make what I just sort of think of as tax deductible mistakes every year, where anytime like I guess this is just good advice for anybody, because I basically allocate the fact that I'm going to be dumb and make one or two dumb mistakes a year. And just because like, that's just the reality of running things. I was commenting on something earlier this morning about someone that was talking about how they were shooting an elopement and they showed up, and then the planner called while the thing was going on, and they were like, all right, so when you get to the reception, and she's like, I'm not shooting a reception. This was not part of what I was doing. And I had a similar thing happen where I booked an elopement, and then I showed up and there were 40 people there, and was like, oh, I guess. And so at first I was angry, right? Like they kind of took advantage of what I assumed was a straightforward policy. But then I realized like I had not been good enough with my verbiage and my contract and how I had worded everything, where like in a technicality, they had slipped through and added more to something that I thought was obvious, but it was my own fault technically for not having included all those things and being more clear. And so I think that like, I mean, that's just an example because I saw it literally this morning. But anytime that I feel like I have run into an issue where a client is being difficult or whatever I might have run into, I try to think, especially because I don't want to be bitter towards somebody that I have to create work for and whatever, is like, okay, where did I fail in communicating that correctly? Like, what did I do to make the expectation for them be something that I did not anticipate happening, right? And so at those points, I just go like, all right, what did I do? How can I make this a learning experience for me? And then how can I reset up my business or contract or strategies or communications to make that thing never happen again? And yeah, there's like probably one or two times a year where something like that happens, whether it's a client thing or maybe I quoted someone for travel and then didn't book the travel for a long time and then had to make, spend way more money on the travel for something than I had charged them. And just things like that where, yeah, there's just multiple times where I'm doing something like that. And those can lead to these massive frustrations where you see someone like anonymously posting in a Facebook group and like going off and hundreds of comments of people being mad. And I always just think like, okay, cool. Like I've had those same things and I got to think how could I have done that differently to result in a different outcome, I guess. And I guess that's one of the ways where I like result in me not being bitter at a client that I have to finish communications and editing and everything for, you know.
It's you also just removing your ego from the situation as well. Like my dad was a photographer as I was growing up.
Oh, interesting.
And he had this line about like, if I mail a client something and it doesn't get there, it's not UPS's fault. It's my fault. Like I just have to take the responsibility for that because now the customer service end has been dropped. Sure. Yeah. And that just expands into the exact same things. It's like every year there's a client or two that they're not a problem client. They're just a client that wasn't educated well enough by the systems I have in place. Exactly. Similarly with you. And I think I remember you telling the story about that elopement, and you ended up shifting your packaging to being like, I have intimate weddings that are 10 people and then 40 people and up and things like that. Yep. And it was this really cool thing to see and go, okay, that wasn't the client's fault. That was somewhere along the way, someone who's never been a wedding client before wasn't given all of the instructions. And I think a lot of times with, like you saying, other photographers in these Facebook groups, that happens and they don't really pause to go, wait, maybe I messed up. Maybe it's not in any of my information somewhere. Yeah. And maybe this client who isn't a professional, they're not the expert. They don't know anything. Yeah. So I even, as I speak with other clients that are potentials, I give them questions to ask future photographers. I go, you should ask for a full gallery, ask for this. Like you might not book me, but at the very least I can lead you the right way so that you do get a good experience with your photographer.
Totally. And I think like doing that kind of thing and being confident in yourself and who you are, especially in those meetings, ends up getting less problems with a potential client because you're going to get better fits. I always tell people too, like, don't only meet with me. Like you should definitely go out and see what other people are doing. Yeah. Because you also might really like my work, like on a website or Instagram or whatever, but hell, you might get off this call with me and be like, I don't think we could spend a day with that guy. Like that's not the vibe that we want. I don't think that guy would be whatever XYZ for us. And obviously I try to be really adaptable to people and all that kind of stuff. But I do understand it. And that's another thing that like, when we're talking about people in the industry being bitter about stuff, like if someone, I feel like we connected well, but then they end up booking somebody else, I'm like, cool, rock and roll. Like there are infinite numbers of reasons why that might have happened. Maybe it's financial, or maybe it's just that they did connect better with somebody else. And I'm not going to take that as a slight at me. It's just, that's a good, thing for them. They got the right combination of things for them. And I think that's another one of those things that just comes with like longevity and experience and understanding that versus, remember, early on, I used to be just devastated if like I thought I had a good thing going with a client and then they booked somebody else. Right. And so, yeah.
I think it was this, like maybe a few years ago, it's probably 2016, 2017, this notion of the ideal client really started being pushed in various workshops. And I remember hearing it and I kind of jumped on board with it for a little bit, but then pretty quickly thought, I don't really want to look for the ideal client. I would much rather be the ideal photographer, because there's a series of wedding days that the client was so great, but I don't really want to be at that kind of a wedding again, or whatever the dynamic was, or the aesthetic, whatever it may have been, that it's really more based on me. And the fact is they are also spending 8 hours with me all day and I with them. We're going to be buds by the end of the day, whether we like it or not. Yeah. And if we don't really get along on this basis that they feel, or I'm not ideal for them, then it's a lot easier to walk away and go, okay, that wasn't a good fit. And it wasn't a good fit because of no reason. It just wasn't a good fit. And there doesn't have to be a negativity to that. And so when I have clients that I feel like I'm their ideal photographer and they seek me out in that way, I feel like those days go the best because they really they really loved me. They really want me.
Yeah. I think a lot of that thing too, and like, we're just like going off in the weeds here, or at least I am.
That's the point of these. It's all good.
Yeah. I think, because I just think whenever someone's talking about the ideal client and whatnot, often they're talking about like the aesthetics and the style and all those kind of things. And I think that all those things can be something that is really important for you in the images you're posting and your website and all that stuff to communicate as a brand and all that kind of stuff. But like when I meet with clients, and those are like, I guess those precursors that are sort of pre-qualifying people to message me, but I still book weddings at venues that don't necessarily look like what you would stereotype my stuff as. And it's because when I meet with those clients, they're like, ultimately, like, we're not getting married in a national park or whatever the case may be, but they love specifically how I capture those interactions between people, or there's something else inherent about the way that I work with people and whatnot that is the drawing force. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, what is most important with me. I've come away way more fulfilled from weddings in a ballroom that wouldn't be something that you would think of as like a Benj type of wedding than other weddings where I've done them in amazing places. And I feel like the client has hired me just because like that's the default for whatever. Maybe they saw a wedding that I'd done at that same place or whatever. And that's definitely more rare. I feel like 99% of the time my clients and I have like a really great connection and all that kind of stuff now, especially. But yeah, I think the way that I go about photographing things is so much more important than the style or the cameras and lens choices and locations and all that kind of stuff, which are like the scrolling billboard of Instagram and stuff like that we see, which can be the thing to draw them in. But the real thing is like, how do you photograph those interactions and all that kind of stuff, for me at least.
Yeah. It's why I tell clients to ask photographers for like a full day of a few different kinds of days. Like my website is its own weeding pool to go, hey, I really want outdoor weddings. There's really not any indoor photos on my website. But that doesn't mean that if you inquire with me and you feel something from the photos and the way that I'm working with clients and interacting with them and capturing, etc., that if you've got a wedding in a church and ballroom, okay, that's fine. It may not be something I post because it doesn't fit the overall brand or something like that, but it's not going to say that I don't want your money. I do want your gig and to work with you and to make images with you.
Yeah. And I won't be any less excited to be there, right? Like I'm going to be all in and doing everything I can. I remember I made this in one of the workshops I did a long time ago, but like I have to go into every wedding like this is the dream gig. Like I can't pretend or I guess I am pretending, like, you know, I need to go into it with the mindset of like, this is their wedding, this is their day, this is the dream thing for them today. And like, I have to tell myself, like, of anything that could be possibly happening today, this is like the dream gig, even if it's somewhere I wouldn't necessarily want to shoot or anything like that. Because if you have that mindset, then you're going to be going into everything, being excited about all the different things and finding the reasons why they booked this thing and all that kind of stuff. And then like your photos will be better because you're having a better attitude about all of it.
Yeah. And I think it results in days spent, because they are our Saturdays too. It results in days spent at a wedding that I probably would want to be at. Like if they like me and all the other things line up, that Saturday is going to be a lot less. I'm not going to wake up in the morning and go, okay, I got to shoot a wedding today. I'm going to be like, all right, I got to go work, but I'm actually stoked to work with so-and-so at this place because I actually want to be there. And that does translate to the images in my opinion.
Totally. I mean, and we're not going to be idealistic and act like every vendor interaction and every whatever is always perfect. But I think that you can have like the 40,000 foot level of understanding, like this thing might be bad right now, but like, I don't have to work with them every weekend, or this situation might happen. And like, how do I take something that's like really frustrating for me and like let it pass and let it not ruin everything for me on that day, where I've had times where I've let that kind of stuff happen, you know?
Yeah. For like a while, everyone, myself included, is just so upset at people on their phones during ceremonies. And I don't remember what it was or when it was, but one day I just stopped giving a shit. I just didn't care anymore. I was like, it is a reality of life that is going to happen. So if I care about it, every wedding it happens, I'm going to be annoyed at the thing that I do that is actually the part of the job I like, because the rest of this gig, we're professional emailers who sometimes take photos. And so if I'm annoyed at the part where I sometimes take photos, this is going to make a problem for years. So
totally.
Just try not be annoyed at the little things.
I always just thought, like, I remember I looked at my my parents' wedding photos for some reason, and like they don't even have a photo of like, I don't think they maybe they have a photo of my mom walking down the aisle. I don't really remember. But I remember looking at that and seeing all their ridiculous outfits from like the early 80s and all that kind of stuff. But then thinking about, okay, what if everybody at that wedding had a camera from their time period? So like like my uncles or whatever, I guess they were in the wedding, but people like that like they're standing on the aisle with like a SX70 Polaroid camera and someone else is there with like a Canon AE1. And, that would be super interesting to see all these people from that time frame with those cameras. And so that's where I think like, if everyone's like looking at the, and, thinking back to even like 10 years ago, or I don't remember what iPhone was out then, but like, oh my gosh, like Uncle whatever had an iPhone 5 and, whatever. It's like, I think that stuff is going to be interesting in 5, 10,
I don't think
years.
it's that bad. I only ever say something about it now if like I'm shooting family formals and there's like 3 people behind me with phones. I might make a quick remark like, hey, I'm going to get these too. Or if people are photographing fireworks, those are the 2 areas where I'm like, get off your phones. But otherwise, it's part of the day, as you've continued to make such a successful business, if you had to kind of pull one thing out of the hat, what would have been your best business decision throughout as you've navigated the point that you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's really hard to say for sure.
It's a really hard question.
Yeah. I mean, I think a big break, obviously, for me was when I started to do like I did like I coined the term adventure elopement, right? Like, and started to do those like 10 years ago. And I think a big part of that for me was like, at the time, the reason I really wanted to start doing it and pushing clients, my current clients, into like, hey, instead of like maybe doing the photos at this golf course that we were already doing, there's a cliffside like on the way between the church and the venue that we could maybe stop at, and kind of moving in that direction. And I think it made things fit better for me and my clients and whatnot to move from, doing like all ballroom and church weddings and whatnot to something that felt more familiar and felt more natural for me, as like I don't normally inhabit ballrooms and things like that as much as I do trying to be outdoors and trying to do that stuff. And so that naturally became a better fit for me. And then luckily, sort of at the time, that's what was like popular on social media. And so everything that luckily was really natural for me also kind of exploded at the same time. And so sort of just, I guess, like leaning into understanding what I would be better at naturally anyway, and kind of finding the types of people that also appreciated that kind of stuff, was probably, if you had to like pick one decision, was that for sure.
Yeah. Do you, and this might be a really, really hard one to answer, do you feel the effects of your business decisions on the industry? Because I feel like when I think about elopements, your like Rattlesnake Ridge one with Laura Lawson Visconti, like that was the start of a lot of that style of elopement. As I grew up shooting weddings with my dad, or later in life shooting my own, the idea of taking the client away from the venue or away from the reception or somewhere in the middle wasn't always like in the cards. Like, hey, we're going to take you away for an hour and a half. And then the idea that the entirety of the day wouldn't be at a place that was structured like a regular venue with vendors and things. That was kind of like the idea of an elopement. Even as I spoke to non-wedding professionals, they always said, well, aren't elopements like you plan them next week or this weekend?
Yeah.
And I went, no, elopements are this whole industry of a thing that's planned like 8, 9, 10, sometimes a year in advance.
For sure.
Do you feel that like what you did changed things?
Yeah, I mean, so yes, I mean, with that one specifically too, it was like the perfect storm of everything, right? Like, and that was over 10 years ago now. So that their wedding or their elopement was May 2013. But it just worked out perfectly. Like their officiant was like a friend of mine. And so like I kind of knew them and had met them at some like random meetups and parties and whatnot. And then like my other friend who'd never done weddings before was their videographer, filmmaker, whatever. And I remember just like hearing what they wanted to do through my friend, and just said like, hey, like put me in contact. Let's hang. And I just said like, I don't care what you pay me. Like, we're going to do this on a Wednesday or a Thursday or whatever. Like, pay me whatever you can. I think I charged them maybe $1,500 for their elopement and their engagement session, which like at the time was.
And had you done a shoot like that prior to that? Was there any other shoot or wedding or elopement that you'd had that was like?
No, I mean, I did like courthouse elopements and things like that. And I had looked too, and outside of people doing like destination weddings in Italy or something like that, like the idea of someone in the city they lived in or whatever, doing something like that wasn't like at a courthouse or whatever. It like just wasn't a thing. I looked and I had Googled like, you know, rattlesnake, like wedding photos and all that kind of stuff. And there was literally nothing. And now you could probably Google that and there'd be like thousands of results, which is crazy.
Oh, yeah, it'd be insane.
And so it just was one of those things where like, I knew that if I did this was like already the kind of thing I was trying to push into anyway. And then, so yeah, and then that blew up. It was like the biggest thing on Pinterest that year outside of like celebrity things. It was like wedding of the year on Green Wedding Shoes, which is like, to me, especially at the time, was like the coolest, trendiest kind of like wedding blog that was outside of like the Style Me Pretty kind of stuff. And so it was just like the perfect storm of all sorts of things. Like Laura had like 150,000 followers on Instagram in 2013, I think. And so that was like a huge thing. And then Nick, the groom, I think he had like a bronze medal at the X Games for snowboarding or something like that too. So like he had his own following. And so it was just like the biggest perfect storm. And yeah, definitely like the thing I was talking about earlier with like the elopement to reception story, that was posted in like an adventure elopement-y kind of group that I don't even run or anything. But that group has like tens of thousands of people in it. And I know there are like tens of thousands of people that like they just do that. Is like they just do elopements. And I know people that like moved from other parts of the country to a place so they could specifically do that. And so I think what's interesting about it too is like, I think a lot of people would assume that that's like, as soon as I caught that kind of bandwagon, that I would only do that as well, just because I would try to ride that wave. And I love doing them and they're fun and everything like that too. But it was another one of those like, okay, we talked about it earlier. Like I'm right here and the cool trendy thing is right here. I want to like be somewhere in the middle so that I can keep this thing going for the next 20 years or whatever. And so like, I still do probably about like 50-50 ish of like elopements and weddings and like some modified version of each of those things. And most of my work is still in beautiful places at beautiful locations and all that kind of stuff that fits kind of like what I do and the best parts about my work. But I never just was like, no, I'm only going to do this. I'm going to shut down everybody else. Because I thought like, I still love doing the whole wedding thing as well. And so, yeah, I think that's part of what helped me be sustainable in all those realms, right?
Yeah, it's honestly really ironic, if that's the right word for it, that you don't follow any trends. And yet, arguably, you accidentally started like kind of one of the bigger trends of people making a place a destination like Seattle, totally. Which we get complained about in the Nuptial Society group often of like, hey, this is a destination spot now. And well, it's Benj's fault. But that
well, it's not my
now
fault.
You've
that's
got
for sure,
clients that sure. Now you've got clients who will be okay with flying photographers to a place or flying themselves to a place to have a day that's so completely different than our parents' or grandparents' weddings. And I think that it can be said as like one of the big title shifts. And like, as I go to a wedding now, there really is never a garter toss or a bouquet toss, or cake cuttings are getting less, the dress hanging by itself like a ghost. Those kinds of things are really falling away. And I think weddings and elopements, like what you started, despite not being a trendy photographer, you started kind of the biggest change, in my opinion, within the industry. And like you said, people moving and changing locations. I moved to Seattle and people said, why are you going to Seattle to shoot weddings? And I said, well, because all the photographers that I follow whose work I want to learn from or look like, well, they're there. So I'm here in Illinois and it's corn. And then there's other people who have businesses who are solely based of being in Colorado and shooting just elopement weddings for 50 or 60 a year. So I think it was huge. And as a photographer who was up and coming and learning in that like 2013 to 2015 space, it was a dramatically huge thing for my slice of the industry to chase after. So I thought it was always really cool. And I still to this day, I'm like, oh yeah, that guy started elopement. That was totally Benj.
I mean, I think the two biggest things as far as like just watching wedding trends and whatnot shift was for me, at least, obviously, because I was on like the cusp of all that kind of stuff, was that first elopement. I think the biggest thing that I got out of that was I talked to Laura, the bride, because she made like a blog post about it and talked about it. And she had like just thousands of people, like DMing her and stuff like that. And just saying like, hey, I'd always wanted to do something similar to that, but like being able to show your photos and show your video and stuff like that to my friends and family, that was the thing that gave me permission. And that like phrase, give me permission, was the thing that like I think was the biggest kind of change there. And then I think obviously during COVID, where people were forced to modify things and do things like that, I think have just freed up people a lot to do the things they want to do and spend the money on the things they want to spend the money on. And I obviously, when I'm trying to help a client go through their timeline or whatever, I'm going like, okay, what do you want to accomplish today? Like, what do you actually want to do? What do you want to experience? What are things you want out of this day? And that's where we can move things around. And like, if they really want to spend something like cocktail hour with their friends and family and like have that connection time, where normally that's filled with portraits and wedding or family stuff,
scheduled
and whatnot.
events.
And, like we can modify things, because ultimately my job is to document how your day went. And the only way I can make good work is if you are having a good time. And I want to bring you back to those moments through my work. And I want those moments to be as amazing as possible. So how can we work through your timeline and your events and all that kind of stuff to accomplish all of those things in the best way possible? And then if that only gives me 10, 15 minutes of portrait time with the two of you, that's fine, because you guys are going to be having such a good time that those things are going to be way more natural anyway. And you're going to end up with great photos.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was a big title shift in the industry, just to say, hey, like, something I tell my clients is I like to be as much of a participant with your planning as your wedding planner is.
Mm-hmm.
Bring me in early and often, so that if you think, hey, do we need another 15 minutes here for this or that? Well, yeah, let's do it. Let's check with Kyle. And that's allowed me to show up on days and really make the best time with, or the best use of our time together, rather than just being handed the timeline 2 weeks prior
Mm-hmm.
and going, okay, that's what I get to work with. And the client usually, as you chase that back, you find out that a lot of that happened because a planner or a mom or a grandma said, or a grandparent said, this is how it should go, versus how do you want it to go. And it gave the elopement angle in these smaller intimate weddings or more free flow weddings, gave photographers the opportunity to tell clients, hey, we can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Like, we can do it your way. And that's a really big shift, which flows to today. And I find myself now too, if I hear a client, I can tell, I go, you're doing this thing that it kind of sounds like you don't really care about. Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
And oftentimes they'll figure it out and they'll be like, oh yeah, I don't need to do that.
Totally.
So
yeah. And I mean, like, selfishly too, like I shoot a lot of weddings where I am like the biggest budget item. Because I don't charge like absurd amounts in comparison to some people I know for sure. But like I often have people that I know ended up cutting XYZ thing that they were maybe going to have at their wedding, because they were like, we don't necessarily need to have this thing, but we would rather spend that money on hiring Benj versus like hiring another photographer that may have been like in our budget, but like we can ditch the thing that we didn't necessarily care about and get the photographer we really wanted, which obviously for me is really helpful. And in terms of like the day and whatnot, I think that one of the things I tell my clients all the time is that my creativity on a wedding day often is spent less with like taking the actual photos and more with like, how can we work whatever the hell is going on today with all the chaos and whatnot of, people being late and things going wrong and whatnot, because like every wedding's going to have that. How can we work that into a way that's still going to flow well and you're still going to have a great time? And oftentimes those are things, obviously, us as photographers end up making the decision either with a planner, or maybe they don't have a planner, which often is the case for me too. And like, how can we work that out so that the client doesn't even notice that this random thing went wrong, right?
Yeah, I think we're way more than photographers. We're managers, and keeping note of the morale of the day is a huge part of the gig, and it's just not the photography. And so I think it's great that the industry has slowly shifted in that way, where we do get to have so much more control as a vendor, and whether or not we're a high budget item of the day or a middle budget item of the day, we still get to kind of step in and go, hey, I'm the only one here that has to deliver things in 6 weeks after today. The cake's going to be eaten, the music's going to be played. Like, it's given us this allowable space to kind of interject and throw some authority around and or just make the day better for the client, which is pretty great.
Totally.
What camera are you shooting with most these days? Not just for weddings, but like, what are you carrying around mostly? Because I know you photograph your kids like crazy on film, and you're like a junkie like me too. So, but what's kind of on your hip most these days?
Yeah. The weird thing now is because I do all these videos for YouTube and whatnot on different cameras. It's like it's a different camera every week. Like I was photographing with the GFX 102 last week. But the camera I most recently bought was like the Sony A7CR, which is like their high megapixel camera, but like really small. And so the cool thing about that is like I can put a tiny lens on it and photograph my kids, or I can put a big lens on it and use it for stuff that's normal. But yeah, I mean, I have like the X100V that I'll carry around if I want to think about nothing, or like M6 if I want to like, shoot film and think a little bit more. So, I mean, that's kind of the problem with me is like, I just have, my wife won't ever watch this, so I have too many cameras, but
I'm going to send this to her now.
She won't watch it anyway.
Every camera I have has like its own unique job. And somebody actually messaged me yesterday asking about some camera recommendations because they have something too large and they're traveling and they often leave their camera behind. And I was like, I get that.
Yeah.
And it's like, I have a point and shoot when I just want to shoot my friends, or a Q2 if I want to like maybe have a great image, or an M6 if I want to, actually shoot some film. But it's really hard to narrow it down. And I do think the Ricoh GR3, I rented it for a weekend just to like see if it fits in my life, especially on a bike. I'd really like to take more street photography from the bike point of view and just be able to reach in my bag and shoot. And I think that'll probably land into it because I just see so many things while I'm cycling around, yourself too.
Yeah.
And my iPhone's just not it for that. It's just not the move. And I don't really want to throw any other Leica camera in my like bicycle bag because I have at least 2 accidents a year on my bike. I don't need to break a camera on top of it. But yeah, it's hard to pick and choose. But
I know.
Kind of wrapping up my like series of questions with you. What's your problem? What are you working on right now? What's your focus?
Yeah, I mean, we've hit it on a little bit for sure. I think the hardest thing for me right now is just, and that's just been the thing at all times, is that just balancing all of the different things that are going on in my life between like trying to like run a YouTube channel and have a Patreon and find a time to release new presets and actually have wedding work that I still need to finish. But then also have 2 young kids and have a wife that also has her own motivations and goals and all that kind of stuff. And so, I've at times, like we were talking about it earlier before we jumped on this call, like officially, about how my wife and I are both very like driven people. And so there are times where like she'll kind of take a back seat to the amount of time we spend and the amount of energy that our family can put towards something. And like, I can pursue something a lot and then I'll kind of get to that point and be okay. And then like we offer sort of just naturally, it's a lot of give and take with like, now she's going to do more things in her career and whatnot. And so, just finding the time. And I think like ultimately, if I had to like put a thing on it, is like prioritizing correctly, time management, all those kind of things. Because I'm the kind of person that I could have a schedule with nothing on it. And I'm like, doesn't like a gas like fill the container that it's in no matter what. I don't know about a lot about science, but I feel like that's me. If I have like an open schedule, I will find a way to fill every single moment of that no matter what is happening in my life. And so a lot of it is just like, how do I best manage being like a photographer and an educator and a YouTuber and a husband and a dad, and also finding time for myself in all those things as well. And I think that's always been somewhat of an issue for me anyway. And I think a lot of people that are self-employed photographers can also probably feel that to some extent.
It's way easier to grip onto your work than it is onto like maybe your own wellness.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And like, I will always prioritize all of the, even when I was listing all those things, they were definitely not in the order, but I put myself last in that thing, which is what I've always done. And so I'm trying to move it to like being, like we talked about sustainability. My business has always been sustainable. All those things have always been sustainable, but like my own mental and physical well-being hasn't been sustainable in those same ways. And so, trying to push that kind of stuff more to the forefront. And a lot of that is going to be mostly just prioritizing my time and my relationships with the people that I love the most. And so, definitely the biggest challenge for sure.
Are there any tangible approaches you've taken to that? Like, are you outsourcing any of your work? Are you like super honed in on a bullet journal? That's a thing I do now, or some series of productivity suites or whatever that you're like, this helps me really manage the day or change how like my week to week goes.
For sure. I mean, honestly, it's not like a software or like a program or anything like that. But I think the biggest thing for me has honestly just been like taking care of my own mental health, in terms of like, I found out a few years ago that I like had actual clinical depression. And then through that, I found out that I had like pretty gnarly ADHD, which didn't know that before. Wish I would have. And so
we can talk about meds after the call.
Yeah, right. I know, but taking care of myself in those ways first then has allowed me to then kind of move down and take care of all those other things and manage all those other things so much better. Which is like why sometimes I'll go cycling in the middle of the day, even if I have a deadline, because I know that mentally I will be more productive and stuff like that afterwards as well. But then as far as like just simple things is like, I come into my office every day. I try to clean up a little bit if I can. And then I just have like a list system where like I have just a little list right by my monitor of like, I make a list out and then I reprioritize that list. And then I move it to like must do things today and things that if I can get those things done, here's what I need to do. And then mostly just like trying with my wife of like being better at calendaring out the different things that we have with what days she's working and days that I need to pick up kids early and all those kinds of things. And then still scheduling in personal time with all that kind of stuff.
I think finding and balancing like ADHD in this biz is a really interesting thing, because I've begged for years to have consistency, a desk where I like plant my butt and I work, and to get to that feels so difficult. Yeah. And I've always been really, really good with dates just because our job makes it that way. Like my calendar has been a rock for like a decade, but tasks have felt like absolute chaos for years. And just kind of discovering ADHD and working with a bullet journal and reading half of Atomic Habits and letting it change everything. Totally. It's been so different. And I think it's kind of amazing for me, at least, that my business had any success, because as I look back at it now, operating the way that my brain works now, the only reason I found success was because the photos were good. But the rest of the business, as I look back at it, was run so seat of my pants, like just really winging it. And it would be so different now if I were to start it again. And I think discovering those things only would have happened because, you know, for 10 years, all I did was extrovert myself and socialize and network and fly and shoot and think and edit and post and share. And that pushed my brain to the bottom of the priority list, which often by, you know, the end of the day, I'm just going to go to bed. Yeah. And so I think it's pretty amazing that as you found that, your business has even just become more consistent and steady, and your ability to balance that with your family and kids and your wife's successes. I think that's really amazing. And so finding those little systems in place. I know you and I chatted years ago about, I think I was buying a lens from you one day and we were talking and you said, the dream world would be like someone else handles my emails and edits and culling, and I just get to go take pictures.
Sure. Yeah. I think
that's why I wondered if you had ever,
it's like 90% of people's dreams, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but there's definitely obviously been a lot of advancements as we're talking on this narrative call about making some of those really annoying things a lot easier. And so that's definitely helped for sure. But I haven't found myself able, I've tried to outsource in lots of different areas to varied success. But I think, understanding my own limits in all those things has been really beneficial for sure.
Yeah, that's amazing. I run into time blindness, so it's like I give myself way too many things, and then it's like there's no way that's going to get accomplished today. And I think I've been doing that for a long time. And if I can just do 3 things well every day for a while versus try to do 10 but actually get 2 done, you'll just advance things so much further. You mentioned you're trying to put out new presets and you're recording some other things. What do you have to kind of plug that's coming up, or any workshops or presets or online things? What's going on?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about gear and whatnot. Usually it's a lot of gear-based stuff, so new lenses and cameras and that kind of stuff, but also some things that I find interesting with software and all those kinds of things as well. But then I also do a lot of videos on a Patreon channel where I talk about like a lot more like not business, but like people that are running an actual photography business would be running into. Like I recently did a video on the Photoshop generative AI stuff and how like it's amazing, but here's some things you probably actually haven't noticed that could be problematic and whatnot. And I do a lot of like behind the scenes stuff on there as well. So like I often will wear like a GoPro or something and film like an entire wedding ceremony and put that up there. And yeah, I've been working, because I feel like that's really interesting to see, because I mean, I don't get to see other people work very often because I'm at my own weddings most of the time. And so it's always interesting to see how people go about doing something. And yeah, I've been working on presets for far too long. And at some point I just need to say like, these are good enough. Like, we'll put them out there. But they're still not out yet. But I still have 2 packs that people can still buy that I think are still great. Trying to think of what else I have. Yeah, that's probably good.
That's great. Yeah, so by the time this comes out, actually, I'm betting your new presets will be out because these usually take a bit. So
that would be great. Let's hope they are.
Description below for sure. Yeah. Well, dude, thanks so much for your time today. It's really great to catch up. It's been a minute, and I always love hearing just about how you run your world, both personally and business. It's really, it's inspirational, but also just really great to hear how someone else operates it, and that they have had you've had such a sustainable business for so long. It's amazing to watch from the sidelines.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks, man. It's always good to chat with you too. It's been far too long for sure.